Hey, what's up, Liron here, and today I'm going to show you one of Watercolor's most fun techniques, approaches, whatever you want to call it, painting against the light. So I have this very interesting scene from Venice, and I actually pre-wet the middle center area so that I can get this nice little effect with the sun. Where I already put water on paper, we're going to have a smooth edge. So that's one way for getting this effect. Now, I want to show you something interesting. We're actually going to try and match the colors, because when you look at this scene, the colors are, in my opinion, fantastic. So you get so many cool purples on the right and reds and the warm for the sky and the brown for the buildings and the very muted blue for the water. It all looks so good together. So I'm almost trying to figure out how much can I get away with and have it look really, really good. So we're starting with that wall on the right, going very strong on that red and the yellow, and I'm going at it quite loosely. This is almost like just an underpainting, but I am figuring out the right positions for the different colors. Look at this building is red, so I'm putting red on it. Now, in terms of technique, this is wet on dry. This is how I paint most of my first washes because it gives me more control. If I pre-wet the whole paper, I don't have much control and things move more. So the building on the right will move more into the sky. The buildings on the left, it's just not enough control for me, which is why I do it this way. Now, I started purple and then I'm like, okay, I need to warm it up with a bit of yellow to make it a little more neutral. I'm not going for as yellowy brown as the photo has it. I'm going a little more towards the gray, even a bit purple. And continuing, look at how this area, I'm pointing with my finger, the area in the center where the building meets the sky, that's going to blend very nicely and kind of stay soft, right? I love that softness. Now here's one key when it comes to technique to wet on dry. The areas that are still wet, you want to rework them. If you need to change anything, improve anything, you want to rework them while they're still wet. And then past a certain point, you let them go, okay? And before you extend your wash, you work on these areas. Because once you extend the wash, you have another new area to worry about. So you take care of what you currently have on paper, like I'm doing now, okay? I'm figuring out the shape. I'm adding an area, and now I'm gonna, after a few seconds, I'm gonna add to that area and improve and change and do all sorts of things, right? But before I'm opening up a new area, I make sure that I did a good job on the existing area. Now, one interesting thing that happens in this scene is how bright the sun is. We're painting against the light. We're literally looking at the sun in the sky, and so on the water itself, we also have very strong highlights. You want to make sure you leave them there and also vary the edges around them. You see the ripples, they cut into the highlights. You want to get this effect down. It looks really good, and I think it's an inherent part of painting this kind of a scene, really. Now, you'll notice how I don't have too much blue yet. I let the first wash be kind of warm for the most part. I'm just adding it here and there where I feel like it really needs to be cooler. And right around, again, the area of the water, very gently. Because this wash is still dry, it's still wet, I can do that, but I need to come back with fairly thick paint. This is not watery anymore. If it were watery, it would move the paint aside. When you come back with a watery wash and a wash that's drier, it's going to spread out the paint, and you're going to get, not only will you get cauliflowers, you just won't get it to look the way you want it to. So when I come back with these colors, they're quite strong as a mix, okay? Now I let everything dry. Everything is fully 100% dry, and we're moving forward with the next wash. Now, this is very important because what I want to do is maintain the looseness and add the values, the correct values, meaning the buildings should be darker than the sky, right? Now, to maintain the looseness, you want to think about connections. All of these shapes, it's just one shape. It's one big shape. Everything is one big shape except for that front of the pavement part and the highlight on the water we're going to paint around. The building on the right has a few highlights separating it, so we're going to kind of leave them there. But for the most part, this is one shape. So we want to think color, value, and shape. And to keep it loose, the more connections you make, the looser it's going to be, because the fewer details we can see. This is just one big block of buildings. The values, again, making them lighter the farther they are, the more they're burnt by the sun. And the colors. Okay, this isn't necessarily easy, mixing the right color, and I didn't go 100% accurate here. Should have gone with a bit more of a muted blue there, almost gray for the farther ones, but it's still gonna look quite accurate. You'll see once we're done. Now, as we reach the water, that's when it's time to add a lot of blue. Colors, if you're asking me about that, I'm using one yellow, which is lemon yellow, and for the red, I'm using sometimes Pyrrole Scarlet, sometimes Quinacridone Rose, so a warm and a cool, and then for the blue, sometimes French Ultramarine, sometimes Phthalo Blue. I like to use both and vary the ratio. I'm leaving those highlights on the building. Those are very vertical highlights, and then I'm making my way towards the water, okay? The water is a very muted and dark blue, and this is my opportunity to make that the highlights on the surface really pop. The way you make an area pop is by darkening everything around it. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're darkening everything, and we're moving down and we're darkening even more. And the lighter part is going to be that, again, that ground, the stones that are in the light. But you'll see how I'm using them to create a very interesting effect in a second. Now, the lower section of these buildings is a little darker, but again, remember, we're keeping it loose. I'm not going for too many details there. The left part is quite, blue. That's okay. That's important. It's almost a grayish blue. So you want to pay attention. Sometimes, again, the magic is in the nuances. So you really want to get the right amount of coolness and the right amount of saturation. Something that's not always easy. Now look at this. This is going to be a fun little effect. So some parts of the paper are wet. And I'm going to use these wet areas to get these cast shadows to make some of them a little softer, you'll see. But first, remember, we have to take care of everything that's connected to the water, to the buildings. We want to make sure we continue this shape, because once it dries beyond a certain point, we can no longer do wet in wet. We can no longer do anything, pretty much. Now look at this part. It started to dry awkward. So I'm extending the wet part, see, like this. And now my paper is wet in these areas. So look at what I'm doing here. I'm going to start dropping in those cast shadows, and look at how nice it looks when some parts of the cast shadows are strong and sharp, and others where the paper is wet are soft. And that creates a very interesting effect of the shadow is strongest at its base. That's what you'll usually find. Shadow is very strong at its base, and as it moves away from the thing casting it, it gets a little softer and lighter. That's something that happens. Now, a lot of the beauty in this scene will actually come from this fence, the metal fence, and how it's layered on top of darker areas. Water is dark, but then some parts of the fence catch the water, right? So it's almost like a story that in order to tell, you need all components to play together well, and one of them is that fence. Now I'm starting to think on the building on the right, and while I'm going to paint it, I will leave, again, thin highlights on the left side, because these look really good. And a big part of Venice is the sun was pretty strong, so you get a lot of sharp, interesting shadows on the buildings. Now this isn't saturated enough, so I'm reaching out for that pure red, and I'm adding a bit more of that in here. Other than that, I'm following the shapes I see, squint my eyes, take a few steps back, really keeping it loose. Very loose, okay? I was really wanting to paint something that is not a cliche Venice scene. So I have a few of these pictures taken, and I'll do my best, because I tried looking for very unique subjects, things that you don't normally see. Not the same towers and the same bridges, but trying to catch something a little more special. This was one of those scenes, because this could be many places. It's just, there's a small body of water. It could be, I think, quite a lot of cities that have a river going through them, but this is the entire city, of course. Now you'll notice I'm treating these shadows on the poles or on the stumps or the wooden, or whatever you want to call it, bricks, as if they're the same wash as the background. Again, connections. Also the water, look, it's going to touch. It's going to touch these poles, these stumps. It's going to touch it on the right, going to touch it in the middle. And this is another unifying factor. It looks really good. Letting water flow together in watercolor is key. It just ends up looking better. So whenever you have this opportunity to do so, I recommend you try. Now, some of you may listen to this and say, whenever you see this opportunity and you're like, I'm so busy with the wash and mixing the right thing that I could never even pay attention to these kinds of things. It will come with time. You'll paint a shape like the shadow on the block, and then you'll recognize that you can put the water now and have them blend together, and it will look fantastic. So it comes with experience. Don't worry about it too much. Nothing's easy really in watercolor. You have to earn all of your skills, but it's fine. So I'm spraying a bit of water just to keep it wet for a little longer because I want to add some of the windows, and I want to add them now when it's still wet. The reason is that it will allow me to keep them loose as I want. I'm aspiring to finish this entire painting in one go. So I'm using all my primary colors. You see me use phthalo blue, quinacridone rose, lemon yellow, not a pre-mixed black. I just find that it looks a little better. So I'm putting in those rooftop details and then the windows. I'm putting the windows quite loosely in, not too worried. It's not meant to be perfect. I am missing a bit of yellow there. It's too bad I didn't use a proper yellow for this building now that I look at it, but that's fine. But in any case, my goal is let's finish this in one wash. Now, some areas are white or highlighted in the background, and so I'm going to show you something I barely ever demonstrate, which is using opaque paint directly into wet paint, wet in wet, straight out of the tube, and it's going to look really good. You'll see. You'll see. Now, sometimes I'm in the mood for painting something that is very, very loose. Sometimes I'm in the mood to devote more attention to the small sections. This time I'm going fairly loose, you can tell. Sometimes I'll really devote a lot of attention to the small parts. It's not one of them. So I recognize a few dark areas within the water that I'm kind of going at it. It's almost like gondolas or, you know, a bit of whatever. Blended kind of detail within the shadows that I'm not trying to make it too prominent. And this is the perfect demo of why it's the larger shapes that matter more than the small details, because this will read quite well, even though it's a mess. And it's funny to play around with it almost like a volume knob and going, you know, how far can I take this? How low? Here we go, wet and wet with opaque paint. It's something I barely ever show. One more concept that I've been thinking about a lot lately as I'm putting this very opaque paint directly, and you see these nice arches there, and for the fence too, and a bunch of stuff. I've started thinking about balance and saturation. So what you'll often find is that all of the scene, for the most part, has similar levels of saturation, meaning how strong the paint is, as opposed to not strong isn't a good word, how clean versus how muted it is. So the difference between a gray and a very strong red, right? And everything in between. Usually the red and the blue and the different areas will have similar saturation. Sometimes when they have very different saturation, it can be a bit jarring for the viewer. It looks strange. So you'll notice here too, most of the scene has similar levels of saturation. That red on the building on the right is pretty much as saturated as the yellow on the bottom and as the blue on the water. It's not very saturated, right? If you can get to a point where you have control of that, what you can do is add one or two details that are more saturated than the rest, and that's gonna pop. To me, maybe the building on the right plays that role for a bit, but it's not even that important to me, honestly, to have that thing. I'm looking at the whole scene thinking to myself, oh, it's a really cool scene. I want to show it all together anyway. But sometimes it's a good idea to have something be a little more prominent, and the way to achieve it is either play with a strong contrast or make it a little more saturated than the rest. And try to have the rest kind of similar levels of saturation. Try and practice this. Because sometimes you'll see people do like tons of gray buildings and then the trees are like super strong green. It just doesn't make sense in real life. Most of the things you're looking at are of very similar amount of saturation. Now, I'm going a bit into overwork with the fence here. I really want to make good use of all of these highlights, and I'm adding highlights that shouldn't be there, but it's fine. It's not going to ruin the impression too much. And you can always paint over opaque paint. That's one good thing about it. You can wet it and just lift it. You can get rid of it. You know, you can paint over it. You can do a bunch of stuff there. So whatever. Making the fence itself, the dark parts, a little stronger, because that's very important, and that would be the most major point of contrast we see with the white in the background and then the highlights. And this really goes to show you how much you can get away with if you just let watercolor be watercolor, which not enough people do. Just let it be itself. How do you do that? Vast, big washes that blend and merge together. Okay, so small paper, large brush, big areas of water. Instead of thinking in small details and trying to paint each and every one, think big areas. Sometimes it's hard to do. On a technique, from a technique standpoint, you practice and it will become easier. The more you do it, the more it'll make sense. It's hard at first, but it will make sense with time. Getting these vast areas in one go, because now I'm doing a bit of playing around with digital art, and I have trouble there when I paint digitally, because it's a matter of being more familiar with technique too. So don't worry about that. Use my finger to smear a bit of that paint. It was a little too strong. That's something I'll often do as well. And here we go. This is pretty much done, if I'm not mistaken. Just smeared a bit of that. It was a bit too strong of a highlight there. Again, I went a little overboard with these. And I'm strengthening some of these cast shadows that kind of disappeared with time. That will happen. Things fade a bit. They become too loose, too invisible. And you may want to fix them. Now, there are these two people there. And I thought to myself, let's add a hint that they're there. Nothing too prominent. So I put the white to the light pants. Put some dark pants next to it. I'm going to put some skin tones, just very weird kind of red there. Just maybe to hint that there's people there. It's not meant to be super accurate whatsoever. But I did feel like I wanted to have a bit of movement there. And you can tell at least that it's not a part of the fence or in the background. You can tell it's something else. So sometimes if we're going to paint almost abstractly, just go for it. Don't be scared, and that's what I'm doing here. Be willing to try it out, try different things, try strange things that you're not familiar with, try stranger things. It's a good show. But in any case, we're almost done there. I will show you a few interesting comparisons near the end of the reference next to the painting. You'll see I was quite close there on the details and quite close on the different elements, the shapes, the colors, everything. I'm mixing a bit of yellow with my white opaque paint there. Just a bit of it. I don't know why I felt like this should be yellow where it's kind of a greenish highlight. Whatever, at the heat of the moment. But in any case, I'm signing this. We'll remove the tape. And I'm going to show you the end result in 1 second. You see how it leaked a bit beyond the tape, but that's fine. Nothing too terrible. So here it is. Here's the final result. Let's take an up-close look at it. The scan really shows it a little better. And then if we zoom out a bit and show a comparison with the reference photo in just 1 second, it will really tell you the full story, and I think it's quite similar. But in any case, I really want to thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. I want to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon. I have to always remember to do that. Much, much appreciated. Let me know in a comment down below if you have any questions, if you need help with anything. Check out the courses, the link below, or the books if you want to get one. Great gift for Christmas, even though this probably will be released after, but I'm not sure. But in any case, thank you so much. We'll see you in the next video.